Alrighty folks, let's start with this base. We're going to be painting this base with a lot of metallics. So I started with gold, and I think my camera died. So I promise I painted that like a nice gold color. And then I'm doing these little pieces in like a black metallic, as you see here, and silvers. Like I said, we're going to start with metallics of this base. This is a really cool model by Sanix 3D. I think this is actually my first one by them, and I was really impressed with how well it went together. As you can see here, I am just spraying the entire base with, like I said, gold, and then we're going to go into the metallics. And the key here to painting metallics is starting, especially with gold and silver, is starting with a black base. Always want to start with a black primer to paint your metallics over, so that way you get a nice warm color, a nice bright vibrant metallics as well. You never want to paint them over colors because it'll ruin the finish. Now you can see here what I'm doing is I had painted this part metallic black, and I'm dry brushing it with light metal from the Dio dry brush range ammo, and I am using a dry brush technique which I've shown many times here on my channel. And what it does, what dry brushing does, is it brings out all the little details without filling in the crevices and whatnot of our model, and what that does is really adds a lot of eye-catching detail. Now to add just a little bit of shadow to it, we're going to try this Nuln Oil in a few shadowed areas just to try to add a little bit more contrast to this base. This base isn't, you know, crazy over the top, and that's okay because I actually like more simplistic bases like this for our model, because when we have things that are too complex on the base, it can get really distracting, to be quite honest. So I'm very happy with the simplicity of this base, but yet it's not something that's too simple, that's not just like a museum quality where it's just a flat pedestal. It actually has a little bit of something to it to enhance our model, if you will, and it snaps together pretty well. And I will say I was shocked. I was a little worried because I'm sure, as you saw in the beginning, the design there is a little weird. So special thank you to my patrons that support my work. If you're interested in daily vlogs, how-to videos, high-resolution photos, early access videos, discounts at my store, and free printable files, check out my Patreon and see how you can get exclusive access to all this extra content. Now when I say the design was a little weird on that base, what I mean is, like, it's not like a solid key and a keyhole. You actually have to like let them sit and stand on that metal piece that we put on there. So it almost looks like it's not going to hold, but it actually does quite well because of the way it's keyed. So anyway, what I'm doing here is I'm adding a little bit of a zenithal highlight, and the reason I'm doing that is because we're going to be painting this model orange and black. This is a specific customer request for this model. They wanted a different look to Wolverine, and it is a legitimate look. I actually did do some research on this, and he was orange and black in some time in the past. I don't know. I'm sure there's more Wolverine experts out there than what I am, better ones than I am. I'm sure they can let me know in the comments exactly when he was orange and black, but I really like the orange and black color scheme. I thought it looked really cool, and it's just something that's fun to paint. Really, I mean, again, it's a cool color scheme. I mean, the blue and yellow looks great. I did X23 a while back with the blue and yellow, so if you haven't seen that, definitely go check it out. That's a very old CA3D design. But anyway, what I'm doing is I'm all the parts that I'm going to paint orange, I'm going to paint white first, because orange is not going to show up on black. So we need a white base for our orange paint to show up on. So what I'm doing is I'm just going through everywhere where I need to paint orange, which is on all his like studded leather parts, and I'm painting them all white. Everything else that I'm going to paint black, I'm not going to mask it. I'll just paint it black later. I really don't like masking if I can get away with it. I prefer not to deal with it if I can, and in this case we can, because it's very easy to paint black at the end. Black is one of the easiest colors to brush paint on because you don't have to worry about tide marks or anything like that, and I'll show you that later. But for now, you can see it's obviously very bright white to start over top of all that nice black primer that we did. And you can see I'm also doing his skin, a little bit of skin tones he has, I also want to paint in white as well. So you can see again. I did find this little issue as I'm going along. So sometimes you'll find things after you start painting, like I found this little pinhole at the top of his head, and an easy way to fill that is to just use a little bit of super glue and some activator to make sure it hardens really fast, and then just sand it flat, and then you fill in a hole. It's the same way you'd fill any kind of seam or anything like that, but if you find little defects like that while you're painting, just catch them as soon as you can, because once you start putting your finished coat on, you really don't want to deal with any of that. So I'm going to be using this Magdamoth flame, or however you say that, this orange flame color. I've used this quite a bit to actually do fire. I think it's a great color for fire, the orange part of it anyway, but it also is the perfect color to go over top of that contrast and zenithal that we made in some areas. Now, when I say I made a zenithal, but I also wanted a base color in white, it's because I did a zenithal in parts where it made sense, and I just painted it white in areas where it made sense. So like the back of his shoe there is a little bit shadowed, and same thing with the bottom parts of his arms, a little bit shadowed. But the important thing is that most of it is white, or at least somewhat white, so that the orange shows up. Because over the black, the orange would be very, very desaturated, and we don't want that. We want this to be a nice, vibrant orange. And that way it'll contrast with the black, of course. So again, you can see I'm just spraying this. And the Citadel paints spray just fine out of an airbrush. You can also use like Vallejo Express colors if you have a color that matches, or like Army Painter's speed paints. I've used all three of them with an airbrush. The nice thing is you do not have to thin them. Don't thin them, just put them right into your airbrush and spray them. I'm using a 0.2mm needle, and it's spraying just fine with no thinner. And you can see this as I'm moving along. Everywhere where I painted white, I've now painted orange. Yes, there's overspray, but we're going to clean that up later with black anyway, so let's just make sure we get these oranges looking good, because that's where your eyes are going to be drawn to anyway, naturally. Again, after we did the legs, we're going to go over all those parts, and remember I said all the studded leather is what's going to be orange, and we're just going to paint with a brush later to take care of all the blacks. Black covers up very easily because it has the most amount of pigment in it, if you will, and the darkest pigment. So if you ever are contemplating how it is that you're going to sequentially paint your model, well, anything that's black can pretty much save till last, and you don't have to worry about masking, especially in this case, like I said, because we're just going to paint everything in black. Now, masking can save you a bunch of time if you want to, so I'm not saying you can't do it. You absolutely can. It's your model. Paint it however you like. But I just don't like masking if I can get away with it. I've had a lot of mixed results with masking, so it's something that you have to have a lot of patience for and really take your time with, and you can get great results. And sometimes, you know, you get the weirdest things happen, and you get paint bleed, and then it's all for nothing, which is really frustrating. So if I can avoid it, I try to avoid it. So here you can see I'm just painting, again, all those white parts that I painted earlier with orange, including his head. So we can see it starting to come together. Now, I'm going to show you how I do the skin tones, and I do skin tones pretty much the same, whether it's males and females. But the one difference you'll see here is I'm starting with like the dark nude pink. I'm not going with such a bright, vibrant pink. I want something a little bit more desaturated because he is a male character. So still starting with a pinkish color, but a much more desaturated one, I'm sorry. Not so saturated like a hot pink. We're using that dark nude pink, which is a nice flat base color. I am going to still use carmine, and for those of you that are not new here, you are going to recognize these paints that I'm using. I absolutely love these Atom paints, and they are available at my store in packs right now, and I'm working directly with Ammo to get them all available in an exclusive skin pack on my store, so we'll talk more about that later. But for now, know that this stuff is available if you guys are interested in these Atom paints. They airbrush like a dream. I'm not exaggerating that. I would never try to sell you guys something I don't use myself. That's the stuff that's in my store. But these Atom paints, they spray like lacquers, but they are all acrylics. I absolutely love them. And that carmine, what I'm doing is I'm spraying it into the shadowed parts, trying to add some contrast as a base layer. And then what I'm doing is I'm adding in the skin tones over top of that we should call it a pre-shade layer, right? The pre-shading is that dark nude pink and the carmine, and then the skin tones is the actual base layer. Now this warm skin is a really good base layer to put down, and you can just lightly coat this over that entire pre-shade, but you want to be careful that you don't put too much on. I've seen a few folks on Discord try to copy my recipe, and one of the things that can be an easy mistake to make when you're layering is to put an entire coat on that actually covers up the pre-shade layers, and it really defeats the purpose of your pre-shading. So it's kind of trying to find that balance when you're thinning out your paint. Like I always thin my Atom paints 50-50, and you'll want to thin them out in a way that makes it so that you are not completely covering up your pre-shade layers. Now, there are times where that's not the case. You do want to completely cover it up, but when it comes to skin tones, you don't. You want nice blends, which means you want to be able to see the layers underneath, your pre-shade layers. That's why we do a complete base coat of the pinks and the reds as our pre-shading. So you can see, as I said, I'm just going through with that skin tone and trying to make sure I get good coverage. If you don't get enough coverage, it'll be too pink, and if you get too much, it'll just turn that tan color. So what you see I'm doing here is I'm going through now with beige pink. After I've done that initial base coat and got the right flesh color I want as my base coat, this beige pink, I go back over the areas where I used the carmine earlier, because that is where the shadows are, or the contrast areas are. And this beige pink is such a nice shadowy color that's it's called beige pink, but it's not really pink. It's more like a light brown, if you will. But it's a really great flesh shade color. I really can't stress that enough. This is one of my favorite shading colors for flesh. And as you can tell, I'm not using any Express or Citadel colors for this, although I really kind of want to try it. I love playing with recipes. I almost always do skins slightly different, but this is my recipe that just keeps working, so I just keep using it. Here we have light skin. This is my highlight coat. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm only touching the centers of the raised areas of each part of his muscles. And what that's doing is it's creating highlights on those muscles. So what we end up having is the warm skin tones in the middle, the light skin tones on the raised edges, and then the dark skin tones in the recessed areas. And that gives us a very natural looking, sculpted, muscular arms of Wolverine, and it just looks really, really good. So you can see I'm giving this to you guys sped up, obviously, so you can see the process, but you can see how that looks in the end there. It gives you a really nice pop with those highlights of the skin. Now you can see here with the masking off what it all looks like after you take that masking off, which is always kind of like it's a fun surprise, if you will, to see all the layers building up and see how the colors come together. Now what we're doing next is we're preparing for a few metallics and starting to do the black. So all the little studs I painted black. I also painted the bottom of his boots black, as you saw there. And then like here we have his gloves that we're going to be painting black. And you can see I'm just trying to make sure I know exactly what it is that I'm painting black and orange, because I have a reference photo from Sanix 3D. As you guys I'm sure already have seen, anytime you go to start one of these models, there's a beautiful reference photo. But if you're ever trying to modify it, sometimes you have to change it up a bit. And Sanix shows this with a yellow, blue, and brown color scheme, but I'm going for a two-tone, so I was trying to decide exactly what I wanted to paint black and orange. And as you can see, here's all those little studs. This took me quite a long time to paint black, so I didn't want to record it all and bore you all with the process of me painting little studs, but it's not as simple as it might seem. You have to paint that stud from like 3 different angles, so it took me quite a few hours to paint all those little things. And then after that, we have the black that I mentioned earlier. And this, again, I know this is probably longer than masking in some regard, but at the same time, it gives you a nice, flat, black, even coat everywhere in all those recesses. And honestly, again, you can try masking and then painting this all with an airbrush, but you're probably going to spend just as much time masking. And what happens is then you risk getting any kind of bleed through or black on all them beautiful oranges, and then it's going to be a real bugger to have to fix it. And I would rather just brush paint the whole thing and avoid any kind of overspray or bleed through from the airbrush. And as you can tell, it turned out really, really nice. I think that looks just absolutely beautiful. So there are still a few details left here on the bottom half, of course. So we have his belt, and he does have a bunch of little pouches that go around there, which you'll see here in a moment. But we do have his belt to paint the black bits in, and then also the X-Men logo obviously on his belt as well. And again, I'm just using, I think this is like a 1 or a 1.5 Marta Kalinsky brush. And this is mostly, if I remember right, I believe I'm using the coal black from the, come on now, Pro Acryls range. I'm pretty sure that's what I'm using here, but I could be wrong, because obviously I didn't record it. But it's definitely black, and that's what we have all throughout. And it may be Pro Acryls black. It might be something else. I honestly don't remember which black I used here. I'm honest. I'm kind of at a loss right now. I want to say it's Pro Acryls, but I feel like Pro Acryls black gets a little bit more of a flat finish, and this almost seems like it has a satin finish to it. So I don't know. I'll let you guys guess. It's either Ammo black, Vallejo black, or Pro Acryls. I don't know. But at this point, I'm just confusing myself as to what black I used. And I'll tell you, any ones I just mentioned are pretty good. But here you can kind of see before and after how I did that. So again, you can see how much easier it is to just brush paint in the blacks. So if you're ever wondering, do I airbrush black? Do I brush it black? Look, if it's black or like a dark blue or something like that, like a darker color, just wait till last and paint it in with a brush. You won't regret it. You know, it'll save you so much time and headache trying to mask it off. Now, after all that's done, I took this orange shade color, the contrast color from Citadel, and I'm just filling in the areas where either I want a little bit of contrast, like those parts in there where it's the studded bits on his leg, just trying to add some orange contrast, and then also add any kind of shadowing as well. I just think it helps break it up a little bit, because otherwise it would just be the same flat orange. And we like shades, we like contrast, and when we look at a model, our brains see the contrast and it actually tricks us into thinking it's real and larger than what it really is. So adding that visual contrast is a humongous help, not only for us as artists, but also for our audience who's actually looking at our art. So what you can see I'm doing is I'm spraying this in all the little recesses and whatnot, and you can see I'm not worried about masking anything off or anything, because this is a contrast paint, so it's translucent. It's really not going to have a major impact on color and whatnot if it's not orange or a bright color. And again, if we have to touch up the black, we can do so with black, because it's just going to cover up again. So you can argue, why not shade before you paint it black? Well, you absolutely could. Now this last step, I've used yellow to create a few highlights. Now you're probably wondering, well, why yellow? Well, because a bright orange is yellow, and I truly want highlights. So what I'm doing is I'm only hitting the areas from above with this yellow. And again, this is unthinned yellow. It's going over top of orange, and yellow doesn't have a lot of coverage typically. So again, what you're seeing here is it's transforming, and you get those bright yellow bits on the tops of the oranges, and it really makes it pop. So now you have 3 shades of orange and the black. So it's very, very contrasty. Are you a collector or an artist? Check out my website at relentlessstormmodels.com, where you can browse a growing library of over 600 models to choose from. I have them organized by genres such as DC and Marvel Comics, video game characters, and even movies. You can also browse by the many designers that I support who design these beautiful sculptures. I'd love the opportunity to print and paint a model to add to your collection, or you can order an unpainted model kit and painting supplies so you can paint a model for yourself. Be sure to use code STORMYT2024 at checkout for 10% off your first order. I want to take a moment to say thank you to the many that have ordered painted models, as the support has been overwhelming and lead times have grown. I greatly appreciate the support and can't wait to share my passion with you. So next up, we're going to take this metallic black over top of all those black metal studs that I made earlier. Remember, I just painted them black to prepare them for this step. I didn't want to paint the metallics on and then do any of the orange shading or whatnot, because I didn't want it to show up, the shading and whatnot to show up on the studs. So I waited till after we did all the shading, then painted the studs last. And I chose metallic black, although you would think that would be too dark. It actually shows up better over the orange. I actually tried gunmetal, which is like what I consider the darker tones of silver, and it was almost too, well, literally it was too bright. So I switched over to the metallic black. So I did use the same color metallic black to start on the claws, but I actually liked the gunmetal better, so they're actually a little bit brighter. So you actually have two shades of silver putting this all together. Here you can see all the studs painted there. Again, these are all painted metallic black from Ammo's Atom range. Now, I want to add contrast to the black as well, and I really like using German gray or any kind of dark gray color if you can get it. I think German gray, though, is my favorite color to use to contrast black. I've tried doing blue gray as well, and there are cases where that's really nice, but really German gray is the best color, in my opinion, for adding highlights to black, right? We want to add contrast. We don't just want our model to be flat black, because that's boring. And then you guys have seen me do this on Black Cat multiple times. I've done this many times now, and it just really works, especially on this model. So you just dry brush on the gray, as you can see here, and all those little crevices and whatnot really pop, because all the raised details highlight in gray, and all the recessed details stay that inky black that we want. And here you can see I used a really tiny dry brush, the smallest in my set, to just touch a few highlights and add a little bit of detail in here amongst all these little folds and stuff around his abs. This is such a cool model from Sanix. This is my first I've ever made by them, and I'm looking forward to many more that I have coming up. Now, with his main body out of the way, we can focus on this mouth. And this is actually, believe it or not, the first mouth I've had to paint that was open. So I actually had to like consider this. Now, I did paint the bear's mouth that was like half ripped off on X23 way back when. So I kind of used a little bit of ideas from that. So I'm pretty sure I'm using Flesh Terror's Red from Citadel on the inside. And then I mixed some like, I think this is the dark nude pink I'm using on the insides of his lips to like do his gums and his lips and stuff. And I mixed the Flesh Terror's Red and the dark nude pink on his tongue as well, just to kind of add a little bit of contrast and make it so his tongue was a little bit lighter than the inside of his mouth. And then I painted his teeth with like an off-white color. I think it's like ivory white, I'm pretty sure is what I'm using here. And ivory white, if that's what it was definitely from Pro Acryl. So it's been a few weeks since I've actually painted this, so I'm trying to remember. So that's, you know, I record what I use both for you and me, because I honestly forget between the time I actually record and actually finalize the video. So now, Sanix made it so you could paint his eyeballs, but every time I see Wolverine in the comics, all I see is white eyes. And I really liked that look. I thought eyes painted in would have ruined it. I really liked that look. So you can see I just left them white, and it looked really good, and it matches the comics. So I wasn't trying to take the easy way out. I really was like, no, I think it would look better without eyeballs painted in. So after that, we do have his scruff on his face, and I'm just using, I think this is like a mud brown color to start. And I'm pretty sure it's an AK mud brown that I'm using here, because I have a lot of military and mud and diorama colors and stuff like that from my armor modeling days. And that's all I'm doing, is just essentially painting this in. I'm using a zero brush just because I want to try to get a little bit of, you know, brush strokes in the direction of his hairs. And I'm just filling that in as best as I can. And you're watching this sped up quite a bit, obviously. And then I took like a lighter earth tone and just filled in a few areas, again with this zero brush here from Reptylon, which again is available in my store if you want something like this. These are really nice fine tipped Marta Kalinsky brushes that you can really, as you can see, paint in all those little details to really make his beard pop with a little bit of contrast, adding in all those light hairs and whatnot over top of the dark hairs. I thought it turned out pretty good. Now, we can add in those pouches that I had painted earlier, which I used the same exact process as I did everywhere else, just putting all of those in place. And with those in place, then we can actually attach the whole body together, like the legs. And I did put the whole body together minus the arms for shipping, just because I don't want the arms to come off. I did paint the X-Men logo red earlier, and little tip, when you're painting the X-Men logo, paint the red area white first, then paint it red. I know I didn't record that process, but just a little tip. I've painted quite a few X-Men logos here in the last year, so definitely a word to anyone doing this on their own. Make sure you paint that white first. So that is essentially how you make Wolverine. Alrighty folks, if you like what you saw today, please like this video. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for extra content, and check out my website if you want to make this model for yourself, or maybe you want to add a piece to your collection. I'd love to work with you. Definitely head over to relentlessstormmodels.com. I hope to see you back here next week for another awesome video and another model to make.